guys, welcome back to Just Another Fish channel. So this is episode 2 of the 300 litre tank build. As you can see behind me, the tank is now full up. It's on the stand that we built for it in the previous video, and this video is going to focus mainly on how to build a sump. You can see we've got the sump tank down there, the glass and bits and pieces that have been cut. So we're going to jump straight to it. We'll get set up down here. And we'll go through how to build a sump. If you missed any of the previous videos on how to build the stand, on how to cut glass and drill glass tanks, it'd be a good idea to pause this now, jump back, watch the first one, because you'll then know how we got to this point. So I'm going to go ahead and get straight on to building the sump. Okay guys, so you have to excuse the poor camera angle, but currently got nothing to put the tank on, so I had to put it on the floor. So we're going to go ahead and start building this sump. The first thing to think about when you're looking at building a sump yourself is you need to first of all take into mind the equipment you're going to use, because a lot of that is going to dictate how big certain sections are going to be. For this sump I'm using filter socks. So obviously my section 1 I know needs to be big enough to house those filter socks quite comfortably. And then the other thing to remember is where you want to put your heaters, and at the far end how big and what size return pump you want to use. And you'll need to know at the beginning what those measurements all are. So obviously for this build I've got a filter sock here, which is it's going to be the same as what's used on the tank. And for the return pump I'm using the same type of pump that I use on the 900. So I've measured that, and I know the dimensions for that last chamber. And then as for heaters, we're going to be using Seago titaniums, so again I know the measurements for those. Now once you've got your tank prepped, you need to clean down the glass to make sure all the surfaces that you're silicone in are going to be dry, clean from dust, debris, anything that's going to stop the silicone from adhering properly. That all needs to be cleaned down. Some people like to use like an alcohol wipe first. Personally I just use a dry tea towel and a bit of elbow grease. I much prefer the dry approach rather than putting anything chemical or alcohol into the tank itself. Just avoids the washing down later and gets rid of any risk. For the silicone you're going to need some aquarium safe silicone. I'm using HA6, is renowned for marine use, aquarium use. Comes in a bunch of colours as well. This is clear, obviously just for the sump, but it comes in black, comes in brown, so it suits any sort of need that you need. The next thing obviously is the glass. So you can see just down here, I've got the pieces of glass cut down to the right size for my baffles. Again, if you want to know how to cut glass and prepare it for the tank, drop back to my first video, episode 1 of this series, where we cover cutting glass and drilling tanks. The other things I'm going to need for this whilst I'm here is I've got a clamp, and I've got some black electrical tape. That's just going to be to hold the glass in place whilst the silicone's curing, because obviously the silicone's not going to be strong enough to support it. As soon as it's put in place, it's going to need time to cure. So I'm going to go ahead and put section 1 of the sump together. This is going to be the section that holds my filter socks, or should I choose to remove them, that will also be where the filter foams go. So I'll show you how I'm going to do this bit at the bottom here. I'll move the camera in. Okay, so for this design of sump, I'm using an egg crate base to section number 1. As that will allow me to keep any media and floss off the base of the tank, which will allow for a better flow, especially as it starts to get built up with detritus and debris and everything else, organic matter. So for that, my first part of this build is going to be to silicone in these smaller chunks of glass, which are going to act as a ledge, which is then going to give me an edge to be able to support the egg crate retainer that's going on the bottom there. So to do that, I'm just going to simply apply a very small amount of silicone to the sides here. Doesn't need to be a great deal. I'm just going to put a couple of lines of silicone all the way along here. Again, this is just to hold it in place. not got to worry about keeping it watertight or anything like that. And then I'm just going to push that down onto the side of the tank there, which is going to give me a nice ledge for the egg crate to sit on. Again, I'm going to repeat the process with the two side pieces. Now, because these pieces are quite small and they're at the base of the tank, the silicone will hold itself in place as it sets. But when it comes to putting the larger baffles in, as you'll see in a moment, we will require some extra support whilst the silicone cures. Okay, so those four chunks in the bottom there are now in place. I'll give you a better side view in a second. What I'm now going to do is put in the section 1 baffle, which is going to sit just on the edge, and obviously that will then secure the front section. Now this is the first section that's going to need supporting, so I've got my piece of glass that's cut to size here. So it's going to sit on top of the glass that I've just put in, and that's going to help keep our gap where it should be. Now to support this whilst it's silicone in, I'm just going to get some pieces of black tape. I'm going to use that to tape the top of this piece of glass to the edge of the sump tank. It's just enough, going to be just enough to support the glass whilst the silicone sets. There is a few other ways of doing this. Some people will buy numerous amounts of clamps, which may be a slightly better way of doing it, I'm not sure. But for me, the black tape method has always worked, and it's cheap enough just to be able to get hold of it as and when you need to. So I'm just going to put these pieces of tape just on one either side so they counteract the pull of each other. It might be worthwhile to mention that whilst we're doing this, the tape needs to be stuck away from the edge of the glass, because you don't want to end up running your bead of silicone over the black tape, because obviously when you come to remove the tape afterwards, you're going to damage the silicone seal that you've put in place, and that's going to, first off, it's going to weaken the seal, and second off, it's going to more than likely remove quite a large chunk of the seal that you've just put on. So that black tape is going to hold that in place there. I'm now just going to run a bead of silicone up either side of this glass pane to hold it in place. Now obviously the tighter that you create your baffle to the dimensions of the tank, the easier this will be. You'll see on one of my other sections of this sump, I've miscut slightly, so the gap is bigger. That's going to be a more difficult pane of glass to fit in. It's going to take more silicone and probably have to be secured slightly better. You can see I've just run a bead up of either side. I'm just going to support the glass whilst I smooth the bead so that it doesn't move. Smooth the bead up each side of this glass. And that is section 1 of the sump in position. I'm now just going to attempt to run a bead up the back side of this glass, although this might be slightly trickier because I've got less space to get the gun in place. I think it's just about enough room to get that in there. But something to consider when you're designing your sump and the dimensions of each piece is to remember that if you don't leave enough room between baffles, for example, the one that I'm going to put in after this is a bubble wall. That is I'm not going to be able to silicone both sides of that piece, because the second piece is going to be too tight for me to get anything to be able to get the gun in there to apply the silicone bead. One side of silicone is enough, but it's ideal if you can do both. So that's now section 1 of the sump completed. Like I say, my filter sock is going to sit in there on a acrylic mesh, and then our water will flow through there. And should I want to get rid of the filter socks and put sponge media in there. I can just cut my sponges to suit. And so the egg crate is going to sit on the bottom there just to keep that in position. Now my second piece of glass that's going to go in is it's going to sit just on this side here. And that is purely is there as a bubble wall, and this will, any bubbles that get that come up from the water will get stuck at the top as the water rolls over the top there. But most importantly, this is going to make sure that the flow of the water is at the right position in the sump. So this will make the water come up and over and then flow down through the media. What you don't want is all your baffles to be gapped at the bottom or gapped at the top, because what you'll end up with is a limited flow of water through your sump. It'll either skim right across the top or skim right underneath the bottom of the media and the flosses, and will greatly affect the efficiency of your sump. So it might be worth, certainly when I very first started designing sumps and keeping fish in the first place, Google is an amazing place to get information. So I would suggest that before delving into this, you do a decent amount of research as to what your end goal is, and what you want to achieve from your sump build, from your tank build in the long run. As this, if you know where you're heading before you start, it's an awful lot easier rather than just trying to wing it as you go along. And that can also sometimes lead to mistakes. It'll lead to regrets later down the line. You wish you'd rather done, oh, I wish I'd done that, I wish I'd done this, or that would have been easier, this would have been easier. And you'll get the best from what you're doing. You'll get the utmost efficiency, cleanliness of water from your sump filtration system, and ultimately that will leave you with happy fish. Obviously, as fish keepers, we like to keep happy fish, because it makes the hobby more enjoyable when you're not constantly fighting water changes and maintenance and sick fish and all that jazz that comes along with it. I'm just going to apply my silicone to this baffle in the same way that I did on the first one. This one is slightly looser fitting, so it is going to cause me slightly more issues when I'm siliconing. I'm having to put more silicone into the glass to make sure I get that seal, which ultimately is not a problem, but it is going to make it look slightly messier from the outside. But as long as you get the seal that you need between the baffles, you're ultimately going to be fine. If you're very keen on keeping things neat and tidy and presentable, which usually I am, but at the end of the day, this is a sump. It's not a show tank. I'd take a little bit more time and care when you're cutting and measuring your glass. The better you cut and measure the glass, obviously the better your end result is going to be. So that is the first section, and the bubble wall on the sump done. Obviously the middle section of my sump is going to become the media chamber, and the final section here is going to have my heaters and return pump, and potentially any other equipment I want to put in there. For this final section, we need the first baffle needs to be lifted from the bottom of the tank. So what I have here is just a block of wood, which I'm just going to place in the bottom of the tank there. That is then going to hold the baffle, the final baffle, in place. When that does so, make sure I get the right piece. That's going to hold this final baffle off of the bottom of the tank in the position that I need it to be. This piece of glass is the one I was talking about at the beginning of the video that I've cut very loose. So this is going to take a bit more care trying to get in place, positioned correctly. I'm going to get my pieces of black tape ready, same as I've done with the first two sections of the sump. Make these a bit longer so they can offer a bit more security, just because the glass I've cut is a little bit shorter. There we go. Right. So now before I do any siliconing, I want to get my tape measure and measure out my distance so that I know my equipment's going to fit in the end. Now I know my return pump, we're probably going to end up using a TMC reef pump 12,000 in here. I know that I need 150 mil or 15 centimeters for that. So that's going to leave my mark about there. I did have a pen around, but I actually can't find where I've put it. So what I'm going to do is just use this clamp as a marker there on the front of the tank, just to let me know where I need to be. Now, as I said, we're going to use Seago titaniums for the heaters. So I'm going to make sure I leave probably an 80 mil gap, which is that much there, 8 centimeters, for my heaters to sit in this section. That way they're in a section that's not going to be drained by the return pump. Ideally, you never want to put your heaters in the same section as your return pump in the sump, as that is the only section of the pump that could potentially run dry. And obviously if that runs dry and your heaters are on, with the Seagos, obviously they're titanium so they won't explode, but they'll get very, very hot and burn out. With glass heaters, if you run them dry, they'll get too hot, they'll crack, you'll end up with glass in the tank, and an all out disaster. So I know that I need to be in this section here, 80 millimeters away from my baffle, to make sure I've got enough room for my heaters. So that is that position there. I'm going to go ahead, same method all the way along, black tape to hold this in place, and whilst the silicone sets. As you can see, this is more difficult than the previous ones, purely because I have cut it slightly too small. So again, it is definitely worth your while taking that little bit of extra time and care when you're cutting your glass to get it right, because you either end up wasting glass because you have to recut, or you end up in this scenario where you're having to make adjustments, and it makes life just that little bit more difficult. So I'm just going to check my measurement again. So I've got 80 centimeters between the two baffles. I'm now going to go ahead and silicone this up, which, as mentioned, is going to be slightly more difficult than I anticipated, purely because I haven't cut it quite to where it should be. This first side is not too bad because it is touching the glass. It's going to be the other side of the tank where I've got the larger gap, where I'm going to struggle to get a decent seal on the glass. It may even be that because the gap is so big, I may even end up siliconing it twice. I may silicone it now, let that set, and then put another bead over the top, just so I know it's completely secure in the position that it needs to be, because it is a very big gap. In fact, looking at it, I'll bring the camera around so you can see. I don't know if you can see past the glare or not. If I move the camera in there, you might be able to see there is quite a big gap down the side there. I think what I'm going to have to do with this is I'm going to get a piece of the black tape and actually tape one side of the baffle up to stop the silicone from coming out the other side. I will let that first bead then dry, and then once I take the black tape off, place a second bead over the first bead to create the double seal that we need on this section. Now these sections don't necessarily need to be 100% waterproof. Certainly I know on the sump, on the 900, I have got the first section does bypass slightly, which is not a great deal. it's not a problem, a massive problem. But obviously the more watertight you get these, the more efficient the sump will be at directing the water as to where it needs to go. This is not going to be the prettiest silicone join in the aquarium hobby, that's for sure. Again, purely because it's down to my poor measuring skills on this particular section. More on the top of the join there, it's not quite made a complete seal. It's also worth mentioning at this point, with these sections that are suspended as such, i.e. not touching the base of the tank, you do need to make more of an effort to ensure that they are completely secured, as not only is the silicone holding the baffle in place, but it's also got to keep the glass off the base of the tank. So it's going to need to be able to support the weight of the glass baffle at all times. Right, I'm now going to go ahead and put in the final section of my sump here. So I need some more black tape. As you can see, it doesn't take overly long to complete this stage. I mean, we've now been going for 17 minutes from start to finish. I should think I would have actually completed this sump and be leaving it to cure in about 20 minutes, which is actually quite a quick turnaround on this front. To remember when I built the sump for the 800, it took me quite a lot longer than that. Although that was slightly different because I used acrylic baffles with drilled holes, because I used a moving bed media as opposed to solid state like we're going to be using in this one. Maybe that's a video I'll do in a future piece on moving bed filters and whatever else. For the meantime, if you're watching this video and thinking, but I'm using a moving bed filter, I would suggest you go and check out Joey Mullen. Some of you like him, some of you don't. However, put your feelings towards him aside. He has got some of his early videos where he goes through building tanks. Certainly his moving bed filter was a good one. Personally, I found it very useful when I was first researching how I was going to run my 900 tank in the other room there. So I'm just going to check my measurements before I finish up, just to ensure that A, the baffle is straight, and B, there's definitely enough room for my equipment, because the last thing you want to do is get to this position and find that you can't fit your pump in after all the silicone has cured. You spent all your time building your sump only to find out that it's either not going to work because there's not enough space, or you have to go out and buy yourself different equipment, a smaller pump, different heaters, etc., because it now doesn't fit. I can imagine that would be a very sorry afternoon, taking yourself down to the local fish store to make that mistake right again, and probably quite a lot of dented pride as well. Now, being that this is the last section of the sump, this section is important, that it is entirely watertight, purely because you're going to be housing your return pump in this last section, and if this baffle is not completely watertight to the rest of the sump, and you get like a leakage between baffles. If for whatever reason your return was to become blocked, etc., you would be able to then pump the entire sump dry, because the water would leak under the baffle or around the side of the baffle, and then that would then leave your heaters exposed, which obviously is not what we want to do, because that will ultimately result in failure of the sump, failure of the heater, and more than likely ill health or death for the fish. Okay, so there you can see we have completed the sump build there in just under 21 minutes. I'll remove the camera from the stand. I'll just give you a slightly better view of the sump. I was going to flip the camera around so I can see what I'm showing you here. So from the front view, you can see we've essentially got a 3-chamber sump. You could potentially call it a 4-chamber sump if you were to include where the heaters are going to go, but in reality all that is an extended sort of bubble wall. I've just made it wider so the heaters go in. So with this design, obviously you can see we've got our glass ridge at the bottom there. That's going to hold a piece of egg crate off of the bottom of the tank, as I say, to enable better flow through the bottom there should the media, if I decide to use media as opposed to filter socks, get clogged, it will allow it to flow freer for longer. And then the second section there is a bubble wall, so it's going to help the flow up to the top of the tank, where it will then come over the baffle, and then that will then go across and down through the middle section, which is going to be my media. I'm using Alpha Grog in this tank, but you can use any sort of static state media, any sintered glass, ceramic, biohome, your bags of Seachem matrix and stuff would go in there. If you were going to use any sort of carbon, that would be a good place to put that on top, although I know some people prefer to put their bags of carbon in different sections to keep it clean. But there again, this is where your research comes into it. You need to design your sump to your own needs, so make sure you know what you need and know what you want to run, as that will directly influence your end product. Once we've come through the middle chamber there, full of media, we're going to come up this section here, which is going to house my heaters. For this, I like to run slightly over, so I know the recommended is sort of 1 watt per litre. I like to sort of add 15% to that rule, just so that you've got a bit of contingency. The other thing I'd like to do as well is run 2 heaters of a smaller size than 1 heater of a larger size, as it gets rid of that single point of failure. So for, say, a 600 litre tank, rather than running 1 single 600 watt heater, I would run 2 300 watt heaters, or potentially 350 watt, just to give you that extra bit of power. With the 900, I run 2 600 watts, so I think the total volume of the 900, including the sump, is around 1100 litres, and I'm running 1200 watts or 1.2 kilowatts of heating in there, and it does the job beautifully. And because it's 2 heaters, not only does it do the job, but if one was to fail, it gives me a longer time to respond before the temperature drops too much in the tank. And then once we've come through this final section, we've got the heaters there. This is going to be coming to my end section, which is going to house my return pump in there. Again, you need to know what return pump you're going to use, or a selection of pumps, so you can account for pump sizes. For example, the TMC 4000 is a hell of a lot smaller than the TMC 1200. I'm not 100% sure on the Ecotech pump range. I'm not sure if the bodies are the same, but it may be the same scenario. The smaller pumps are physically smaller than the bigger pumps, so you need to work out what size pump you're putting in there, and potentially what other equipment you might want to put in there. Likewise, if you're building a marine sump, you need to incorporate things like skimmers and that sort of equipment. If you want to run bioreactors and that sort of thing, algae scrubbers, refugiums, etc., you need to take that into account before you design your sump. The final piece of this sump, which I haven't showed you guys yet, is on this end. We have the hole drilled in the top there for a 53mm outlet overflow. That is part of our auto water change system. So when we get this all plumbed in, obviously the fresh water is going to come into the sump, and the diluted wastewater is going to flow out of that overflow there and through the hole that we drilled in the wall there as part of this tank stand build. So there you have it, guys. That is the 125 litre sump that was been built for before this 300 litre tank build. It's important probably to mention here that this obviously is a 125 litre tank. It's not going to hold 125 litres of water any day of the week. It's not going to, you've got displacement from the media, displacement from the filter floss, and then most important of all, obviously we're not filling this tank to its highest capacity. In fact, you'll probably be lucky if this holds around about 90 litres, maybe 95 litres by the time it's full and running. Obviously we're only ever going to fill the tank to roughly this height as opposed to the level it would have been, which is up here. So you've got that much of the tank that's technically unused, but that is the nature of a sump. So there you have it. Let me know what you think. The final section of this video, of the final section of this series, we're going to move into actually installing the sump underneath the tank there where it should be, and we're going to go through the plumbing. Obviously you can see up there we've put the weir into the tank already. The 3 holes are drilled at the back there. The weir is in and siliconed up. Obviously that is watertight, otherwise I'd have water pissing out the bottom of the tank now onto the floor. So we're going to go through plumbing in your main tank to your sump tank, and then we're going to go through some of the electrical connections, how to pipe up your automatic water change with your fresh water and your wastewater connection, and then we're going to go through some of the things that you can add to help make your fish keeping experience slightly easier: smart plugs, sensors, auto dosers, that sort of thing. I think with this, on a final note, my plan is to try and keep a planted goldfish tank. You can see for now I've just thrown the ornaments that we had in the smaller tank in now. We've just got the plastic plants and that in there, and I've got a bit of rootwoods floating at the top. But I think we are going to try and go a full planted tank here with a Nubius Java fern, that sort of thing. So we will be running CO2 injection, we will be running auto dosing for the chemicals and fertilizers. So that would be an addition to the final video there as to setting up CO2, etc. Let me know what you think, guys. As always, it's real good to get your feedback and comments. I mean, again, I'm just a hobbyist like you doing this sort of thing. I'm not professional, so it's always good to get your views, whether you think, you know, am I doing it right, or does this guy actually know what he's on about because it doesn't look like it, that sort of thing. If you want to see the next video, you enjoyed this one, you want to see how it turns out, obviously click that like button, click that subscribe button, and click the bell to get your notifications, and we will we'll crack on with this, and the end piece should be something really quite nice. So again, thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you again next time.